Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar or looking it online because it's as the webinar is recorded. I am Thomas Leguénan from BRGM, a member of the ENOS project, and today we will have our first experience sharing focus group webinar on the theme of data management. So I will have some logistic afterwards. If you have any question, if anything is not working, you have a question panel, sorry, on your GoToWebinar software, and you can ask a question. I will see it on my screen. So ENOS is a H2020 European project. ENOS stands for Enabling Onshore Storage. A big part of ENOS, of course, is scientific research, but we also have activities dedicated to international cooperation with various forms. It starts with twinning sites, where sites exchange data on a one-by-one basis. We have a leakage simulation alliance, and today we are here for experience sharing focus groups. So experience sharing focus groups are a way to enhance knowledge sharing. It's open to all researchers around the world. It's based around specific issues, mainly issues that can be important for enabling onshore storage. And so we have planned 7 webinars and 3 workshops. We already are. So we are now at the first webinar. As you can see on the right, this is the preliminary program. By the way, if you have any remark or if you would like to have to propose a topic or to speak at a future topic, you can contact me or anyone at ENOS, and we can certainly make arrangement on this. And yeah, it's a bit different than research priorities in the sense that we are here more, we try to remove practical hurdles to running a successful pilot sites. So the first webinar today, we had a workshop last year where we discussed what topics we could discussed in these webinars, and one of the first ideas that came up was data management, because when you run a pilot site or even an experimental site where you acquire a lot of data, then you have some issues. How to allow various people to work on the same data sets and to collect various data sets, sometimes very heterogeneous data. How you ensure consistency of data across the researchers, because if someone is changing the data, then the others need to see the changes that have been done. You need to have a good way to archive this data so that you do not lose data when someone is leaving the company, for instance. And of course, it all comes in the new policies of open data, open science, that European Union is actively pushing. And so I am not an expert. Today I will just be the chairman. We have 2 presentations today, which will be complementary. The first is from Eugene Holubnyak from the Kansas Geological Survey, and he will talk about the interactive database for the Wellington CO2 EOR and storage project. And then we will have Maxine, Akhurst, and Mary Mowat from British Geological Survey, and they will show you the ENOS long-term archiving of data, the UK CCS Research Centre Data and Information Archive. After the, we can have questions dedicated to each presentation after each presentation, and then we will have a short questions discussion session at the end, and I don't expect this webinar to run over 90 minutes. So just quickly, for those who are not familiar with this kind of webinars, all microphones and webcams are muted. If you want to ask question, you have like I said, a question panel that the organizer will see. What, as a chairman, I will ask and distribute the question as I see them. At the end, if someone wants to share an experience when dealing with data, we may be able to open the microphone and hear you, if that's interesting. So that's all I have to say as an introduction, and without waiting further, I will give the floor to Yevon so he can speak to you about his experience. Hello, Yevon. The floor is yours.
Hello, and yes, I'll try to get comfortable trying to share my screen with the presentation. 1 second. Could you see my presentation slides?
Yes, it's okay.
So every time I make it a full screen, it seems like it the software doesn't grab the screen, and so I probably will leave it like that. So thank you for this opportunity to present our work from Kansas Geological Survey. This is a big team here at we have an energy research section at Kansas Geological Survey, and energy research section historically been interested in CO2 storage and sequestration. My colleague Lynn Watney, he started basically single-handedly started the entire program here, and we had a number of projects that were funded by Department of Energy that were related to CO2 storage or CO2 EOR in Kansas and in mid-continent United States. And the Wellington project is in particular related to the larger program at DOE that considers many various sites that could be used for commercial storage. And a Wellington project is a pilot scale project where we performed CO2 EOR, and we were also thinking about doing saline storage as well, but it didn't go through because of we had permitting issues with Class 6 applications, and it's a different story. But nevertheless, I just gave you sort of a short introduction about the project. And so, although the CO2 storage project did not start, we gathered a lot of background data. And not only background data, because in the middle of, as soon as we started activities related to the project, we started having induced seismicity problem in the area of a project. This induced seismicity is related to wastewater disposal that is associated with oil production from unconventional resources, and main resources are Mississippian limestone, and this Mississippian limestone, because of the high water cuts, provided a lot of water. Water started to the company started to inject water into the Arbuckle Formation, which we considered for CO2 storage. And because of this, earthquakes started, so we had to start recording of those earthquakes. We were thinking about recording earthquakes in any case, but it became even more interesting because of this induced seismicity problem. So we had obviously, especially with this problem, we had to create a database that could accommodate all of those aspects, and so of the project. The seismic array data that was coming, it takes a lot of space, computer space, the storage to store all this data, and also the oil field production and geochemical history from the EOR flood that we performed also takes a lot of time and space to process. And related to the CO2 EOR, we did inject 20,000 tons of CO2 for storage, for EOR and storage, and it was a successful flood, and we recorded the history of production from all the wells related to this pilot area, but also we recorded data from geochemical survey that we ran in order to make sure that we understand where the CO2 plume is, and to locate the CO2 in the field. So we sampled a number of wells, and you will see later where the wells are, what is sort of the area, what is the scope. And the other aspect to this data collection was that the data had to be processed and also displayed on the go. Because of this vast amount of data, we thought it would be nice to display it somehow on the go, so we could use it immediately. And each researcher uses data separately, and so as researchers use the data, they do not re-upload it to the common dataset. The common dataset only has two sort of main data points. One is a raw data, another one is a process data. And the process data, I will show you a little bit what we processed and how we processed. But that was basically it. And the rest, researchers on their own would receive data and would deal with data and produce publications or presentations or whatever research products they were producing, and then sort of go from there. But they would not return the data from the final processing into the main hub. So that is how the data was structured. On the first slide, you can see that, again, a lot of people were working on the project, but specifically John Victorine is the main admin of data. He is not only gathering and making sure that we have an interface for this database that researchers can use, but also he used special algorithms that I will share to process certain data points. So you can see this web interface, and this web interface and the database will become public as soon as we are done reporting for the DOE, and so everyone actually can access and download, upload the data to their computers and do whatever research or use for students or whatever you need to do with this data, you can do because it's a public access. So let's go to the next slide, and I will exactly show what kind of data we had. And so we had those three areas of the data set. The data set. One is from CO2 EOR performance monitoring. One is a geochemical survey. Another one is oil production history, and they had separate tables. Then there's a seismic array data, and then there's also this deep saline aquifer pressure monitoring. So we had a pressure gauge that was collecting pressure information from Arbuckle saline formation continuously since 2015 until the end of the project in September of 2017. So, and the resolution for this data is 1 second. So there's a lot of data, and also requires a lot of processing. Here you can see on the left side of the screen, this is the projected CO2 plume from the would-be CO2 storage. And it didn't happen, but we collected data nevertheless. And on the right side of the screen, you could see the CO2 UR in the field. So this is the yellow area is approximately the distribution of a CO2 plume in the field, and this is the area that was sampled. So pretty much all the wells you can see on the picture were sampled for water and production data. So we had about 15 wells that were sampled, and all this data was entered into the database. So especially for the field historical data and for the geochemical data, we thought it would be very handy if we could somehow visualize the data on the go. So how it happened, basically we had field people who would go to the field to collect samples from geochemical and from the field production data. They would enter this data in a database, process geochemical samples, and with a lag of about a couple of weeks, we would have data in the database. And then, in order to make decisions about where to go next or how to manage the CO2 flood, we thought it would be a good idea to visualize. And so this is the gridding and animation algorithms that we used, sort of in a nutshell. It's because of the presentation format, it's difficult to show exactly how we approached it, but you could get an idea from this couple of slides in the presentation. And this next slide shows exactly the progression, and this applet that John Victorine wrote could map the geochemical data and could simultaneously map up to 3 parameters together. I personally prefer only 2-dimensional slides, but some people like them. Then they could do more. They could implement, if they could implement more data in sort of 3 dimensions in this mapping. But the main takeaway from this is that you could simultaneously map the pH or temperature from the field, or field production history, or field various chemical components from the brines that you sampled, and map them and see the progression almost immediately. And that in some cases it was very useful. In some cases, actually, it could hurt you, because you could panic from unexpected sort of consequences, because a lot of times you don't understand exactly what is going on, and it takes time to process. But nevertheless, it's a very useful tool to be able to map what is going on in the field immediately. So these are a couple of examples, and again, once this database become public, you could play for the controls and map the data points on this mapper on your own. Probably it's going to happen sometime in January. Also, because of heterogeneity of the data, and because we also did sampling using different sort of service teams. One was the Holubnyak, no, not Holubnyak, the Baker and Hughes team that sampled for chemistry. oil field chemistry and processed it in their lab, and we also had the university that sampled the oil field and processed it in their lab, and they had different procedures. And by different procedures, I could go into a little bit of details, and because in some cases the samples would sit in a lab in a different environment, and some labs have one temperature conditions and humidity conditions and other conditions, and in other labs they have different settings, and in both cases the samples would sit different amount of time before they get processed. And we noticed a discrepancy a little bit of a discrepancy between the samples from the service company and from the university. And so we had to, and it is a known problem, known geochemical problem, so we had to deal with the data, and we use this principal component analysis and normalizing of the data to bring those samples together. And I will not go into too much detail, but you could take a look at the slides maybe a little bit later and see how the processing was conducted. I'll go quickly through the slides so you can see the data sets. You can see we pick the outliers. We use certain methods to analyze for those outliers, and we use the normalization method to bring those samples to a bit normalized state. And again, we did preserve the raw data, but we also found that it is very useful if we do use this normalized data. In many cases, it is more useful than looking at just the raw data without normalization procedures. You sort of see a little bit the picture that the normalized data, we believe, is more according to what is really happening in the reservoir, as opposed to the processing errors. And so again, I'm quickly going through the slides showing how we normalize that. You can go on your own and see the methods we used. But you can see how the non-normalized samples are distributed here in these data sets. You could see that the samples from the Baker and Hughes sit sort of below the line, and the K-state data set sits above the line, and definitely something is going on here. But if you apply normalization, you can bring them a little bit more together, and they are more coherent set. Here, the next slide shows how the data looked like without a graphic interface. And so you have wells, and each well would have certain parameters to it, the number, the IP number, the GPS location, the elevation, so on and so forth, plus the chemical data, and also you could access the historical data for each well as well. And we did develop this graphical applet that could visualize the data from each well as well. And you could build the Piper diagrams and so on and so forth. And also you could see the data that was collected directly in the field, and you can distinguish between the data that was collected in the field and in the lab. If you go deeper into the database and sample for the well, and then for the time slots for each well. And again, you can visualize your data on the go, Piper diagrams, and more detailed data sets for each moment of time throughout. And also the useful feature with we really like, you can plot the data and use the plots in your presentations, or for the funding agencies or whatever else on the go. We found it to be very useful. the second set of data that we had was the earthquakes, and we also found that it is very useful to have a 3D animation plot, or in order to see where the earthquakes are happening. And you could do it by different ways. You can also upload this data into the, like Google Maps or ArcGIS or some other third-party software. But and we did that. But also sometimes it could be useful to plot it on the go, and that's why we did create this animation software. And here's an example of this animation software. And you can choose your parameters, time, and you could plot it in 3D because earthquake data is three-dimensional. The locations are three-dimensional. And again, a little bit more. We created a map of in sections because each state in the United States is divided by counties, and each county is divided by sections. And this is useful engineering information that you could utilize to to locate your data in space. And the other area where we collected data was this pressure catalog from the deep sensor that was sitting at about around 5,000 feet deep in a silicon aquifer, collecting pressure data, pressure pulses from the formation. We just wanted to see if we had, if there's any fluid movement, and if there is fluid movement in this formation, how can we capture it, and is it significant? And yes, we did find that it's a significant pressure increase in the formation. In our location where we didn't have a nearby injection, the pressure increased from about basically up to again about 32 psi in pressure since 2013, 12 and 13, when we started recording. And excuse me. And so you can see that this data from this graph in particular, you can see that the data is very dense, and you have to apply many different methods in order to clean up your data, because some of the noise could be attributed to different phenomena. Some of them is tidal, some of that is just noise from the stretching of the cable on which the sensor is sitting, and so on and so forth. And so you could take away this noise, you can take away the tidal effects, you can take the barometric effects, and you can after that you'll have a little bit different curves but also by processing these smaller sort of noise issues, you could decipher some more information from this processing as well. And so you could see why and how and why we process this. And again, later on you can sort of chew on these slides and see what we did here. I will not go into too many details for the sake of time. And if you have maybe more questions for me, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email, and I will, or ask here, and I will try to address your questions. So this would conclude my presentation, and I would rather go for questions than just load you with more data, with more slides. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Eugene. It's very impressive. You had a lot of data. If there are some questions from the audience, we can take them now. Of course, it takes a little bit of time if they want to type it on the keyboard. You mentioned that your the database will be public. I think I heard.
Yes. Yes, the database will be public once we clear up all the issues with our funding agency and internally. Once we will be ready to release it, it will become public in 2018, early 2018, I would say.
Okay, and accessible through the KGS website.
Right, correct. It might be accessible to some extent even now, but I think I would wait until early 2018 to get access to it.
Okay, that's very good. Okay, I don't see any new question coming, so we will switch to the second presentation, and maybe have if you have question for Eugene. In the meantime, we can ask you after BGS presentation. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So I switch presenter. Okay, Maxine.
Hello, everyone.
We can hear you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maxine Akhurst. I'm a geologist at the British Geological Survey.
Hello, I'm Mary Mowat. I'm a data manager at the British Geological Survey.
Now I'd like to give you an outline of the ENOS long-term archiving of data. Thank you. The ENOS long-term archiving of data will be made available by using an existing setup, the UK CCS Research Centre Data and Information Archive. So the archive is already in existence, and we will be able to get the benefit of it for the ENOS project by using a setup that has already been tried and tested. The archive holds digital data outputs generated by CCS projects, and those projects are funded by the centre itself. They are funded by the UK research councils. There are also volunteer projects like the ENOS project, and also some legacy projects, which Mary will demonstrate to you shortly. It also contains links to other CCS datasets where that's appropriate. So it archives data and information for the long term by the project, and it very much complements what is already held on the ENOS website. Very importantly, it gives us access to and also reuse of data, and this is to enable collaboration between ENOS and other projects, and for other researchers to be able to cite the data and information produced by the ENOS project. It is freely available to all. Not all of the data is immediately available, and that will be because there is perhaps an agreed embargo period if it is required, but we'll go into that a little bit more later. Very importantly, there is a search and download facility so that it can be used by you, the inquirer, to look at metadata and data from the ENOS project. The project itself very much has a commitment to open data access and to archiving. First of all, it's an EU-funded project, so there is an obligation in the ENOS grant agreement to disseminate our results. And indeed, this is part of it here with our first webinar. And we also have an obligation for public disclosure of those findings as soon as is reasonably possible. Within the project itself, we have a commitment to provide open access to as much data and supporting information as possible for the benefit of scientific research for CCS and more widely. The data may be subject to an embargo. This may be because it isn't yet in the process of publication, perhaps in a peer-reviewed journal, or is subject to the terms of the ENOS exploitation plan. The data it contains will be mostly from the ENOS pilot sites. These are from Hontumin in Spain, from the Geoenergy Testbed near Nottingham in the UK, and from the Solstice Fault Laboratory in Sardinia in Italy. It will enable to give long-term access also to the project deliverables. So the ENOS Data and Archive will be using the existing UK CCS Research Data and Information Archive. So what is the role of the archive itself? First of all, it is to provide the archive, so it is set up already, and it is coordinated and arranged, and is recognised and it meets recognised data management standards. We ensure that there is a web interface to enable you to archive or to access the archive to the archive data that has been lodged there. We make sure that is streamlined, so that it is making it as easy as possible to use, as we are also researchers and we also appreciate ease of use. The archive also gives support to the ENOS users. First of all, having an initial contact with the project investigators to find out what they want and how we can provide it, to give online provision of guidance to those depositors of data, and also to give a help in the preparation and to check the metadata, that is the information about a data set that is to be lodged in the archive. We will also ensure that we maintain the archive, keeping it up to date with the latest data management and web delivery developments, and we will endeavour to ensure that continued online access to enable submission and access to both data and the metadata. A very important question is, what data does the archive expect to keep and make available? It's important to know that the data that is contained within the archive is that is of long-term interest, with the potential for reuse by the originators themselves, but also with potential for collaborators. Importantly, the data archive should include data that underpins publications from the project, and enabling a validation of those research findings that are peer-reviewed. Also data that is worth keeping. It is important that the validity of the published research findings are testable using the data in the archive. One of the things that we also can undertake is to issue a digital object identifier, so that data that's been lodged from the ENOS project in the archive can be cited. There's always the question about what about restricted or confidential data. This is particularly true when industry and external parties are involved in the research. The default position should be that the data is open access. And if there are any restrictions, those restrictions must be both valid and reasonable. If it is restricted, the metadata for that data set should include a statement explaining why there is a restriction. Sometimes the restriction can be of a limited period, and that the data can be held under embargo for a specified period. For example, if your data is being used in a peer-reviewed publication which is under review and in prep or not yet published. So the type of examples of data that could be held are those that are made available to the ENOS project on an in confidence basis, that is, it is confidential. It may be that the data has been provided for the project by an external industry contributor, or it may be that there are commercial interests that must be protected. However, that shouldn't restrict us in too much. We should agree from the outset and during the project, and we will do so with our industry collaborators and others, what can be made available. Importantly, this should be agreed during the project, and it won't wait until the end, to make sure that there are products that can be uploaded into the archive. So that's given you an outline of the ENOS provision and the delivery by the UK CCS Research Centre Data Archive. Now I will hand over to my colleague Mary, who will explain, illustrate and demonstrate the use of the archive.
Thanks, Maxine. So I'll give a demo of the UKCCS RC Data and Information Archive website, which we're using for the ENOS project. And I'll also give an overview of the archive and the data archiving procedures. First of all, this is the web address here, so it's bgs.ac.uk/UKCCS. And there's various things included on the website, such as access to the data. There's an upload portal to upload data. You can access data by project, and there's also various submission guidelines for the depositors from the project who are going to submit data to the archive. The archive is a recognised data repository. As it was originally developed for UKCCS RC, all the necessary infrastructure was already in place. So this meant it was quite easy to implement the archive to use as a long-term archive for the ENOS project. We can add any extra additional data for the project into the archive quite easily. Anything from the ENOS project which is open access or temporarily under embargo can be included in the archive. This includes the field data from the various sites, such as the baseline and monitoring data. It can also include interpreted data, possibly model data, and associated source code if this is useful to validate some of the research findings. The work package leaders for the project should discuss with the participants in their work packages, and particularly the site owners, which data in particular should be released for long-term archive. They should discuss, as Maxine said, which data should be open access, which should go out under embargo, and which should be withheld from the archive as they're confidential. In addition to data files, other types of information can also be included in the archive. This includes things like reports, presentations, posters, educational materials, basically anything that is useful and not solely data files. This kind of information helps set the context for the data itself, in addition to just the files. I'll go on and give a quick demo of the actual archive now. So this is our main data archive. On the front page, there's just some general information. If we go to the data tab at the top here, this gives the search facility for the archive. So there's both a simple basic text search and also an advanced search. So we can search on something like here. So for example, if we search on the ENOS project, we can search here, and this will bring up all data sets that we've entered so far for the project. So at the moment, we've entered, archived some of the public open access deliverables from the project. And more of these will be added as they become available, and also the various data sets related to the project. So you can scroll down and see all the different deliverables that have really been released so far in the just over a year the project's been running. But in the future years, a lot more will be added in here. And then you can view the individual records, which gives you more information about the data set. And then you can also go in here and download the actual files. If we look into the advanced search box here, this gives you the option to search, be a bit more specific, search on data title and description, things like your depositing organisation or project. So for example, we could go in here and search on British Geological Survey, and this will bring all results related to that organisation. There's also an option to go in and view all projects which are currently archived. So this gives a full list of projects which are archived in the UKCCS Data and Information Archive. So we have various projects here relating to EPSRC projects, UK projects. We also have some related to EU projects, Quite often we have some of the final reports for some of the legacy EU projects. We also have some of the early research, such as the Joule 2 projects. You can go and view a summary of the project, and then you can also view the data sets themselves. Various papers and reports related to that project. So for ENOS, we can also see as a summary. So that just gives a summary of the project, and then those related data sets here. So that's just another way of finding the data sets, and they have all the metadata related to them in here. And then if we go to the How to Submit Data tab at the top here, this gives people who want to archive their data more guidance about how to do this. As Maxine mentioned earlier, we provide support from the archive and advice on data management, and also actually archiving the data in the data center. We have a general email address here where people can contact us, and we have a guidelines for depositor document, which is a lot more detailed guidance in there. We have a data management questionnaire. This is a type of data management planning tool for the work package leaders and the task leaders. I'll just show you an example of this. It's quite a simple form, and they kind of can fill this in, and it collects details of the expected data sets that they expect to produce during the project, and details of when they want to deposit. So it's quite a simple form, and it's a good way for them to gather their thoughts about which data sets they intend to deposit. It's kind of a good starting point. So this can be completed at any time during the project, but preferably early on if possible. So then there's bits here where they can enter the different data sets that they intend to generate. And it also gives them a chance to think about the third party and any confidentiality concerns, or if there's any IPR issues that might restrict access to the data. So we'd encourage the different work packages to complete this form. And we have various methods that people can deposit data into the archive for long-term archiving. The first of these is our data deposit application, where people can upload data, and it also includes various forms to enter information about the data deposit, and also the metadata which describes the data. So it's an easy to use kind of online form. It's useful for when they're completing it, if they kind of collect information that they're going to enter beforehand. But it does give you the option, if you're partway through entering, that you can save it, and then you can come back to it another time if you don't have all the information to hand straight away. It saves the information. We have an Oracle relational database backend where the information is saved. So you enter information about your name and your details. I've got one here, I started earlier, just so we don't have to spend time entering all the information. So you enter things like your data title here and your description. It's important that these are kind of well thought out. So the data providers should give their data sets good titles and descriptions. So this is part of the discovery metadata, which helps users locate the data in future and determine whether this data would be of possible use to them, so they could reuse the data if they wish. There's a section for methodology of how the data set was created. You can enter keywords, dates, if there's a geographical extent, and file formats. And then we can go to continue. You can enter information about the restrictions in here. So you either get the option for the data to be open, or you can select restricted here. And then if it's restricted, you need to enter an end date for the embargo period. So the embargo period is normally between 6 months and 2 years. but that depends on the specific data itself. And then you just need to justify why the data should be held restricted in there. There's also an acknowledgement statement which you can enter to make sure that the data owners get credit for the data set. If we go to continue, oh, it won't let me enter, so I'll just set this to open at the moment and click continue. And then you can just go in here and upload the data. I just select. Quickly select the file. You can just upload your files. So it enters here, and then we just go continue. I'll give you a summary of the information you've entered. You just have to check you've entered everything correctly, and then submit there, and then that'll be entered into the system. So it'll get copied into some temporary Oracle tables to start with, and then the metadata will be checked. And then once that's passed any checks, that'll be uploaded into the archive, and those data sets will be available for download. In addition to the data deposit application, there's other ways that you could submit data to the archive, such as by email, by various data transfer programs, or for a hard disk if the data set is very large. We also can issue digital object identifiers, as Maxine mentioned earlier, for your data. And this enables data to be cited as in the same way that journal articles can be, and enables the data creators to get credit for those data sets. And if a data DOI is to be issued, you must ensure that the data set is of very high quality. So it must be well presented and well explained. If necessary, additional information about the data can be included within the data set. So any additional documentation that would enable someone to use the data set in future and explains a bit more about it and ensures the data is easy to use and can't be misinterpreted in future. So any data that's associated with publications should be archived, and often the journal will ask you to provide a DOI for the data sets. So that's useful. We also have a frequently asked questions page on the website. This just gives a bit more details of what kinds of data to include in the archive. Some of the things that Maxine mentioned earlier, data that's worth keeping, potentially for reuse. Data could potentially be reused for uses currently unforeseen. And any kind of data which is unique and it can't be regenerated. So any kind of observation data can be archived. This just gives a bit more information in there. So all the data should be well organized before submitting, and it should be quality controlled by the data provider before it's sent to the archive. And that's more of the information which Maxine's already mentioned earlier. So that's basically a quick summary of the website. The other things, the contact us page. So that's the email address for the archive is ukccsrc_data@bgs.ac.uk. And then Maxine and I would be happy to answer any questions or contact us if you have any by email as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maxine and Marie. We have a few questions from the audience. The first one is from Vit. who asks that, so the question is, are the data stored as delivered, or is there any procedure regarding the formats? For instance, for geophysical data, we can have various formats for the same method.
Yes, data would be stored as received. The only thing we'd ask that dataset formats are in formats that are suitable, that people will be able to open those formats in future. So avoid proprietary formats which people won't be able to have access to. But we don't reformat data or anything in the archive usually.
Okay. We have a second question from Sergio Persolia, who asks, did you implement tools to show online reflection seismic data? I think, well, I let you answer this, but I think this is an archive of data, not necessarily a visualization data website.
Okay. So the data is as we receive it. So if it is in the format, it is reviewed in the format that it is submitted in. So there is no tools to view, but what you can do is you can download the data, which is most of it is in a standard format, so that you can use tools with which you are already yourself familiar. We try to ask people to use standard formats, for example, of the seismic, so that if you want to upload to your own seismic interpretation package, then you can do so. We try, if people do have to have a non-standard format, we ask them to include the information so that somebody else could set it up in the same way, the setup parameters. But in terms of the tools, in answer to your question, Sergio, the tools themselves are not part of the archive.
And so there was a follow-up question, I think, which was, can seismic data be chosen from geographic maps? I think your previous answer also is answering this question.
So can the seismic? No, I think what we will only provide a map of the position of the seismic profiles or the seismic cube if the originator has provided that. That's a very short question. I understand. It's a very short answer. And if perhaps that is something to be considered for the future, but we will only upload what people provide us with if they show us a chart or a map which shows the position of their seismic lines. Then we will include that as well.
Okay. Sergio says, thanks for the reply. I fully agree with the strategy you have implemented. So, congratulations. If we have no more specific question to BGS, we can have a few minutes. We can take more questions for both presenters, or for the three presenters, more exactly. If you want to come back to what Eugene presented. I had a question to Eugene, because as we see in ENOS, we have BGS doing work specific dedicated to data management and data trying to retrieve data from the researchers. Did you in KGS have a dedicated persons working full-time on data, or was it like more policy and each researcher was agreed to put this data on the main database?
No, we had a John Victorine. One person was in charge of the data archive for the Wellington project. The KGS, like many surveys, have capabilities of processing and storing data and our survey is sort of in the same position. But for the Wellington project, we had a specifically dedicated person.
Okay, thank you. I have a question from Marie-Gastine, who asked to both. What were the main challenge you faced when setting up the database? So maybe starting with Eugene, did you face any? What was the main challenge?
The heterogeneity of the data, especially because the conditions of the projects are changing, and you have to create the flexible database architecture from the get-go, so you could add or remove certain portions of a database on the go. And another one was the visualization. Visualization right now is becoming easier and easier, but when we started the project, it was a bit of a challenge, and we had to come up with our own capabilities to be able to visualize the data.
Yes, I guess it's difficult to do. Did you develop everything, or could you use like third-party modules to help with visualization?
We used only in-house visualization tools, but right now, like a few years ago, when the archive was already set up, there are some new products on the market that probably would be suitable, but it's already too late for us.
Okay, I'm just taking back the screen so so Maxine can get her back. So so Maxine, I ask you the same question now. What do you think is the main challenge when setting up the database in your case?
I think one of the main challenges is making sure that we give good guidance to the depositors. We help them as much as we can, so that when they submit their data, when we have a look at the review at the metadata and we check it to make sure that it's all okay and it meets the high data management standards, I think the challenge is making sure that we guide people enough so they get it right first time, and also that we speak to the person concerned that has generated the data. So you need to speak to that person because it is their data, they know it and love it best, and they are the most suitable person to provide the information and to provide the data itself to make sure we get the final version in its best standard. So really it's communication with the people who are lodging their data, and also make sure that we give guidance that is clear to them to get it right first time. I think that's probably the biggest challenge. Mary, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely providing as much guidance as we can, trying to make it as easy as possible for any of the data providers to deposit their data in the archive. I think that's the hardest challenge for this project. And for previous projects, actually setting up the infrastructure for the whole archive has been another issue, but I think we've encountered most of those issues previously, so those have all been ironed out before starting on the ENOS project anyway. So as Maxine says, yeah, mainly the communication with the data providers and providing as much guidance as we can.
Okay, thank you. I have a question from Vit Ladik, who asks to have the microphone, so I will give you. Okay, I think Vit, you can talk now and ask your question directly.
Okay, thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes.
I would have a general question to both or all three presenters, but maybe also for comments also to the other participants of our webinar. This open access to our data, this is something that should be perceived positive because this is data required for public money. But on the other hand, we are at some moment losing the control of what happens with our data after this is downloaded from our website or database. And in general, we can expect that some other researchers take our data and work with them to achieve some, let's say, more positive, better results. But also, I think there is an option that somebody interprets or uses the data in a wrong way, either with this, let's say, lack of knowledge or background knowledge to the data, or even to achieve some misinterpretation of the data, to achieve some bad results. For instance, to dehonest the CO2 storage method as such. So do you feel such danger, or is it something that we shouldn't consider as an option?
Okay, thank you, Vid. I will. So, who wants to start? BGS this time? Do you want to answer?
Okay, I'm happy to do that. Thank you, Thomas. Thanks for your question, Vit. Your concern about that there's losing control of your data when it's downloaded. I think if you make it clear in the setup of how you used your data and what sort of setup you used, how you interpreted it, I think that's always a great help. If your work is robust, you need not concern. You can refute the interpretations that you feel is a lack of knowledge. I understand the concern about the misinterpretation of data. I think, however, if you have been careful to make sure that the information is complete and it is properly documented, there will always, that's the best you can do. There will always be people who do not wish to be as supportive as to the interpretation, and so if you are aware of that, you will make sure that your data as it is lodged and the detail provided with it are very clear.
Yes, I'd agree with that, Maxine. Yes, it is a bit of a balance between trying to make available as much open access data as possible, but ensuring that data can't be misinterpreted. I think that's the onus isn't kind of on the data provider to include that additional information with the data set itself. So not just the data files themselves, but including some extra textual documentation with them to provide additional information and linking to the actual publications that explain the data. And you'd hope that the data wouldn't be misinterpreted, but there can be a danger of that, but you just have to be aware and make sure you include all those information with your data.
Well, there are two facets. We can misinterpret the data, or someone can take the data, interpret them correctly, but use them in to have some kind of publicity to say CO2 storage is bad, or in a way, if they want to. Eugene, do you want to answer this question from Vit?
Oh, it's very simple for us. It has to be open access, and that's it. You know, I don't have anything else to add. And this is a requirement from both the state and from DOE. Once it's public, it's public. Yes, there's going to be a request you have to fill to get to the data, but once the request is filled, you know, the data is provided in its raw form, and you can deal with the data as it suits you.
Okay, but you say, for instance, you have a lot of data now, and you have a lot of earthquakes, basically.
Yes. Yeah, we have about 2 terabytes of earthquakes.
And that can be a quite controversial issue if some people are not in favor of let's say, fracking. So, but you don't have choice yet. That's
it's not exactly the fracking related. It's related to injection activities. So it's not fracking per se. It's more of the fluid disposal thing. But it's the same for all government agencies, because there's USGS. United States Geological Survey. It's different from KGS because it's on the federal level. They have the data set that is available, and we are also renting the seismic array from more or less federal level agency, IRIS, and from all of those ends, the data sets have to be available. The USGS data set is available currently on the website, and you can upload it real time, basically, as the earthquakes are added to the archive. And they are adding earthquakes to the USGS database all the time. I just didn't see. Maybe there were not precedents for the misuse of data, but it's really difficult to arrange the misuse. Basically, just populate, and you definitely see the earthquakes. The problem is with interpretation, and interpretation of why the earthquakes is still up to the jury. There's no clear-cut understanding of the mechanism, and until then, but the data itself is available.
Yes, I was thinking just in France we have newspapers. They now, since 5 years, they like to have some kind of data enhanced articles. And they could perfectly, take the data, make a map of and correlate earthquakes and fracking activity or shale gas activity, and say, look, there is a correlation. And without more justification, that would be very misleading for any readers.
Right, but that could happen in the United States too, but it never happened before. And because they use the newspapers mostly use different tactics, and the data misuse wasn't an issue before. It's not that it's not possible to happen, but it's just never been an issue. But even in this case, it is still open access, because it's even if you use the data sets, it's up to debate in a peer-reviewed process. For you to to get your point across. So you have to go through the peer review for this to be valid. Otherwise, it's you can do whatever you want, but it doesn't mean that it has any scientific or scientific value. So I think that's the main mechanism for how it works here.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Sergio, who's asking me basically if the two presentations will be available through the webinar or in the ENOS website. So, like I said, the webinar is recorded and will be available on the website. And if you the presenters do agree, we can also upload the original file on the website. If that's okay with you?
Sure, I will provide my presentation, definitely.
Very good.
And BGS is happy to provide our own presentation as well.
Thank you very much. So that answers Sergio's question. Do we have another question? No, if any of the presenters have any suggestion or comments, or then I think it's been quite a successful webinar for a first, and If any of you have any question about this subject, you know how you can contact us. You should have received a mail from me, so you can always send me a mail. Through the webinar software, I think you can access, we allow people to see each other's mail if you want to ask direct question. So just a reminder now that the next webinar is planned to be in March, and we plan to do it on smart drilling and in particular, and the reduction of costs in general. So if you want to speak, or if you know someone who would be a good speaker for this theme, for this topic, please contact me. That's very helpful. Otherwise, you can wait for our next mail and put it on your calendar for the next event. If if no one has any other remark, then I think we can end here, and I will wish you a good day, depending on where you are on the planet. Well, thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Thomas.
you.
Bye.